Welcome to Cold Case Files. Tonight, we are covering 10 of the most disturbing cases from the state of Ohio. These are real cases, real victims, and real families whose lives were changed forever. We present these stories with the deepest respect for the victims and a commitment to the facts as established in court records and official investigations. Let's begin. Case 1. China Arnold, the microwave murder. Our first case comes from Dayton, Ohio, in the summer of 2005. On a hot August night, a 26-year-old woman named China Arnold returned to her apartment with her boyfriend, Terrell Talley. The two had spent the evening at a local bar, and by the time they got home, both had been drinking heavily. An argument broke out between them, a dispute over the paternity of Arnold's 1-month-old daughter, Paris Talley. What happened next shocked the entire nation. According to evidence presented at trial, China Arnold, in a state of rage and under the influence of alcohol, placed her infant daughter inside a microwave oven. Paris was just 4 weeks old and weighed barely 10 pounds. Arnold turned the microwave on. The following morning, Arnold's 7-year-old son found his baby sister unresponsive. He woke his mother, who then called 911. When paramedics arrived at the apartment on North Wyoming Street, they found Paris with burns so severe that medical personnel initially could not determine their cause. The autopsy performed by the Montgomery County Coroner's Office concluded that Paris had died from hyperthermia. Her body had been cooked from the inside out. The burn patterns and internal injuries were consistent with microwave radiation exposure. Investigators from the Dayton Police Department began questioning Arnold immediately. Her initial story was that she had put Paris to bed the night before and found her unresponsive in the morning, but the medical evidence directly contradicted her account. As detectives dug deeper, neighbors reported hearing a baby crying in the middle of the night. Arnold's older son provided additional information that proved crucial to the investigation. Her boyfriend, Terrell Talley, was briefly considered a suspect, but evidence increasingly pointed to Arnold herself. Prosecutors argued that the couple's argument about Paris's paternity had pushed Arnold into a violent rage and that she had directed that rage at the most defenseless person available, her own newborn daughter. China Arnold was arrested and charged with aggravated murder. The case drew national and international media attention. Arnold's first trial in 2008 ended in a conviction and a death sentence. However, the Ohio Supreme Court overturned that conviction in 2010 due to procedural errors in the original proceedings. A second trial was ordered, and in 2011, Arnold was again convicted of aggravated murder. This time, the jury recommended life in prison without the possibility of parole rather than the death penalty. During the sentencing hearing, prosecutors described a woman who showed no remorse. There were no tears, no apologies. The judge called the crime unconscionable and stated that Arnold would never be free to harm another child. Today, China Arnold is incarcerated at the Ohio Reformatory for Women in Marysville, where she will spend the rest of her life. Paris Talley never took her first steps. She never spoke a single word. She had been alive for just 4 weeks when her life was taken. Her case remains one of the most disturbing examples of child murder in American history and is studied in criminal justice programs across the country as an extreme case of parental violence. Case 2. Nicole Diar, the house fire that couldn't hide the truth. In the spring of 2003, firefighters responded to a residential blaze in Lorain County, Ohio. They expected to find a typical house fire, perhaps caused by faulty wiring or an unattended stove. Instead, they found the body of 4-year-old Jacob Diar inside the burned structure. Jacob's mother, Nicole Diar, was a 31-year-old single mother who, according to later testimony from neighbors and investigators, had shown increasing signs of being overwhelmed by the responsibilities of parenthood. Neighbors reported that Jacob had appeared thin and withdrawn in the weeks before his death, and that he seemed fearful around his mother. These warning signs went unreported. Fire investigators examining the scene discovered evidence of accelerants, materials used to deliberately start and spread fires. The burn patterns indicated multiple points of origin, a hallmark of arson, but it was the medical examiner's findings that changed everything. Despite the extensive fire damage, evidence suggested that Jacob may have already been been dead or unconscious before the fire started. The position of his body and certain injury patterns led investigators to conclude that the child had been killed and the fire had been set to destroy the evidence. Nicole Diar's account of events was inconsistent from the very first interview. She claimed to have been away from the house when the fire started and to have returned to find it in flames, but witnesses contradicted her timeline. Neighbors reported seeing her vehicle in the driveway during the time she claimed to be elsewhere, and store surveillance footage failed to support her alibi. Prosecutors theorized that Nicole Diar had suffocated Jacob. The exact method was difficult to confirm due to fire damage, and then set the house ablaze in an attempt to stage an accidental death. Investigators found that in the months before Jacob's death, Diar had become increasingly isolated, had expressed feelings of being trapped by motherhood, and had shown signs of severe depression. Diar was arrested and charged with aggravated murder, involuntary manslaughter, aggravated arson, and abuse of a corpse. The prosecution sought the death penalty. At trial, prosecutors presented forensic evidence, witness testimony, and expert analysis. The defense argued the evidence was circumstantial and that fire damage made it impossible to determine cause of death with certainty. The jury disagreed. Nicole Diar was convicted on multiple counts, including aggravated murder, and was sentenced to death. In the years following the verdict, after multiple appeals and legal challenges, her death sentence was commuted to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Today, she remains incarcerated at the Ohio Reformatory for Women. Jacob's case changed how fire investigators in Ohio approach residential fires involving child victims, and it prompted new training protocols focused on identifying when a fire may have been set to conceal a crime. Case 3. Gail Ritchey, the baby in the woods. On a cold December day in 1993, two hunters walking through a wooded area near Chardon, Ohio, in Geauga County, made a grim discovery. Partially buried in frozen ground and wrapped in a plastic bag, they found the body of a newborn baby girl. The Geauga County Sheriff's Office launched an investigation, but without any identifying information, the case quickly went cold. The infant was buried in a local cemetery under a headstone that read, "Geauga's Child." For 21 years, the case remained unsolved. The grave became a quiet landmark. Community members left flowers and stuffed animals, honoring a child whose name no one knew. Then, in the early 2000s, advances in forensic DNA technology and the growth of genealogical databases opened new possibilities. Geauga County authorities revisited the case, extracting DNA from the preserved remains and submitting it to modern databases. The breakthrough came in 2015 through genetic genealogy, the same technique later used to identify the Golden State Killer. Investigators were able to trace a family connection to a woman named Gail Ritchey, who had lived in the area at the time of the infant's death. Detectives approached Ritchey, now in her 40s and living what appeared to be a stable life. After more than 2 decades of silence, she confessed. According to Ritchey's own account, she had been 18 years old in 1993 when she became pregnant and concealed the pregnancy from everyone, her family, friends, and the baby's father. She gave birth alone in her home. She said she panicked, fearing the reaction of her strict religious family. Rather than seek help or surrender the infant at a hospital or fire station, she wrapped the newborn in plastic and drove to the wooded area outside Chardon. She left the baby there, in freezing December temperatures, to die. Ritchey was arrested and charged with murder, involuntary manslaughter, and gross abuse of a corpse. Her defense attorneys argued for leniency. She had been a frightened teenager with no prior criminal record who had lived quietly for more than 2 decades. Prosecutors countered that Ritchey had made a series of deliberate choices, each one moving closer to the infant's death. In 2015, Ritchey pleaded guilty to involuntary manslaughter and gross abuse of a corpse. The murder charge was dropped as part of the plea agreement. She was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 15 years, meaning she would not be eligible for release until around 2030. The case renewed public discussion about Ohio's safe haven laws, which allow parents to surrender newborns anonymously at designated locations without fear of prosecution. Ohio's safe haven law came too late for Geauga's child. She remains remembered by that name, a symbol of innocence denied. Case 4. MingMing. A daughter's life ended in a family restaurant. On January 19, 2017, emergency services were called to a Chinese restaurant called Ang's Asian Cuisine, located in Jackson Township, Stark County, Ohio. The call was for an unresponsive child. When paramedics arrived, they found 5-year-old Ashley Xiao, the daughter of the restaurant's co-owner, MingMing Chun. Ashley was not breathing and had sustained serious injuries. Despite the efforts of emergency medical personnel, she could not be saved. Ashley Xiao was pronounced dead. The Stark County Sheriff's Office immediately opened a homicide investigation. The medical examiner's report was devastating. Ashley had not only suffered fatal injuries on the day she died, she had multiple wounds in various stages of healing, indicating a sustained pattern of abuse that had been ongoing for some time. The cause of death was blunt force trauma. Ashley had been beaten to death. As investigators interviewed witnesses and family members, a troubling picture emerged of MingMing Chun's behavior. Those who knew the family described her as having an explosive temper, particularly toward Ashley. School records showed a concerning pattern of absences, and at one point, Ashley had been officially withdrawn from school, reportedly for homeschooling. Investigators suspected the real reason was to prevent anyone from observing signs of abuse. The cultural dimension of the case drew significant attention. Some in the community raised questions about whether Chun's understanding of discipline had been shaped by cultural norms different from American standards. Prosecutors and investigators were direct in their response. There is no cultural context that justifies beating a 5-year-old child to death. This was not discipline. This was murder. MingMing Chun was arrested and charged with murder. She initially claimed Ashley had suffered an accidental fall, but medical evidence made that explanation impossible to sustain. Rather than proceed to trial, Chun accepted a plea agreement. She pleaded guilty to involuntary manslaughter, child endangering, and permitting child abuse. In September of 2017, she was sentenced to 22 years in prison. At the sentencing hearing, Chun expressed remorse through interpreters, claiming she had never intended to kill her daughter. For those who had reviewed the evidence of Ashley's prolonged suffering, those words were difficult to accept. Ang's Asian Cuisine closed shortly after Ashley's death. The case prompted changes in how Ohio approaches child welfare cases involving immigrant families, including increased training for multilingual child welfare workers and better outreach to isolated communities. Ashley Xiao was 5 years old, the age when most children are learning to read, making friends, and experiencing the ordinary joys of kindergarten. Her grave has since become a place of remembrance, visited by community members who never knew her in life, but who want to honor her memory. Case 5. Krystal Candelario, the vacation that left a toddler to die. In June of 2023, Cleveland, Ohio, was rocked by a child death case of such calculated indifference that it drew national media attention within hours. Krystal Candelario, a 32-year-old mother, decided she wanted to take a vacation. She wanted to travel to Puerto Rico and Detroit. Her 16-month-old daughter, Jalen Candelario, was at home. Rather than arrange childcare or take her daughter with her, Krystal Candelario left the toddler alone in their Cleveland apartment. She was gone for 10 days. For 10 days, 240 hours, Jalen was alone, confined to a playpen, unable to reach food or water, unable to call for help, unable to understand why her mother had not returned. When Candelario came home on June 16, 2023, she found her daughter's body in the playpen. Jalen had been dead for days. Cleveland police officers and paramedics who responded to the 911 call noted immediately that the apartment showed clear signs that a child had been confined for an extended period. Jalen's body showed the physical effects of severe dehydration and starvation. The Cuyahoga County medical examiner confirmed that the cause of death was exactly that. The toddler had died slowly, without food or water, over a period of more than a week. Investigators quickly uncovered what Candelario had been doing during those 10 days. Phone records, financial records, and social media posts documented a woman on vacation, checking into hotels, making purchases, posting photographs. While her daughter was dying alone in Cleveland, Candelario was enjoying herself. She had made no effort to check on Jalen or arrange for anyone else to do so. Further investigation revealed this was not the first time Jalen had been left unattended for extended periods. Neighbors had at times heard the baby crying for hours without anyone responding, but had not known the child was alone. Krystal Candelario was charged with aggravated murder. The evidence against her was complete and unambiguous. In February of 2024, she pleaded guilty to aggravated murder and child endangering. At sentencing in March of 2024, the judge described her actions as the ultimate betrayal and stated that she had shown a total disregard for human life. He noted that Jalen's death had been slow, painful, and completely preventable. Candelario was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She will never be released. Jalen Candelario was 16 months old. She was at the age when children are just learning to walk, beginning to form words, discovering the world around them. She trusted her mother to come back. Her mother chose not to. The case has prompted renewed discussion in Cleveland about community vigilance and the need for better support systems for isolated parents. Case 6. Sydney Powell. When a daughter's rage turned deadly. This case is different from the others in one important respect. The victim was not a child, but a mother. In March of 2020, in a quiet residential neighborhood in Akron, Ohio, neighbors reported hearing sounds of violent struggle coming from the Powell home. When police arrived, they found 50-year-old Brenda Powell dead inside her home. She had been stabbed multiple times and beaten with sufficient force to cause extensive blunt force trauma. Her daughter, 19-year-old Sydney Powell, was found at the scene, covered in blood. Sydney initially told investigators that an intruder had broken in and attacked her mother. Detectives found no evidence to support this. There was no sign of forced entry. Nothing had been stolen, and the physical evidence at the scene directly contradicted her account. As the investigation continued, Sydney's story became increasingly inconsistent. Eventually, she admitted that she had killed her mother, claiming it had occurred during an argument that escalated into a violent confrontation, and that she had acted in self-defense. The autopsy results made the self-defense claim very difficult to sustain. Brenda Powell had been stabbed over 40 times. The number and nature of her wounds indicated a sustained, prolonged attack, not a brief struggle for survival. The medical examiner documented injury after injury across Brenda's body, including defensive wounds, indicating she had tried desperately to protect herself. As investigators examined the background of the Powell household, they found a troubled history. Sydney had struggled with mental health issues and had been in ongoing conflict with her mother over rules, responsibilities, and her direction in life. Friends described escalating tension in the months before the murder. The prosecution presented evidence suggesting premeditation, including internet search history and statements Sydney had made to others about her anger toward her mother. Sydney Powell was tried as an adult and convicted of murder. The judge sentenced her to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 15 years. Her case has since gone through various appeals and legal challenges related to her mental health treatment and trial representation. As of this recording, the case remains in ongoing appeals proceedings. Brenda Powell had been a devoted mother who worked hard to support her family. She did not deserve to die at the hands of the child she had raised. The case has been cited in discussions about early mental health intervention in families where conflict is escalating and about the consequences of leaving serious warning signs unaddressed. Case 7. Tamara Banks, Starvation and Neglect in Clermont County. In 2022, in Clermont County, Ohio, emergency services were called to the home of Tamara Banks for an unresponsive 4-year-old girl. When paramedics arrived, they found a child in critical condition, severely malnourished and dehydrated, far below the expected weight for her age. Despite emergency medical efforts, the little girl could not be saved. She died from the effects of prolonged malnutrition and neglect. The Clermont County Sheriff's Office opened a homicide investigation. Investigators found that the home was in poor condition, lacking basic sanitation and safe living standards. The evidence made clear that the child had not been adequately fed for a significant period of time. Medical experts would later testify that the degree of malnutrition the girl had suffered did not happen overnight. It was the result of months of systematic deprivation. The autopsy confirmed the cause of death. The child had essentially been starved to death while in her mother's care. She showed signs of severe vitamin deficiencies, prolonged dehydration, and organ stress consistent with extended caloric deprivation. Tamara Banks was arrested and charged with involuntary manslaughter, child endangering, and related offenses. Prosecutors argued that she had willfully withheld adequate food and care from her daughter, and that food assistance programs and social services had been available to her, but not accessed. Banks accepted a plea deal rather than face trial. In 2022, she pleaded guilty to involuntary manslaughter and related charges. She was sentenced to 9 to 13 and a half years in prison, making her eligible for parole after serving a minimum of 9 years. The sentence drew criticism from some who felt it was insufficient given the severity and duration of the child's suffering. The case prompted Clermont County to review its child welfare procedures, particularly around identifying children who are not enrolled in daycare or school, and who may therefore be invisible to systems designed to protect them. Mandatory reporters, teachers, doctors, child care workers received additional training on recognizing the physical signs of malnutrition and chronic neglect. The 4-year-old victim deserved better. Her short life should have been filled with nourishment, safety, and care. Instead, it ended in preventable suffering. Case 8. Tien Hawkins, a mother indicted for her toddler's death. In the summer of 2025, the community of Adams County, Ohio, was shaken by a case that revealed the hidden suffering of multiple children within a single household. Tien Hawkins, a mother of several children, was indicted on serious criminal charges after her 2-year-old daughter died from asphyxiation. Emergency services had been called to the home for an unresponsive toddler. Despite life-saving efforts by first responders, the 2-year-old was pronounced dead. The preliminary cause of death was determined to be asphyxiation, and the Adams County Sheriff's Office detectives worked the case as a potential homicide from the outset. Medical examinations of Hawkins's other children, conducted as part of the investigation, revealed signs of abuse and neglect across the household. The children showed evidence of malnutrition, poor hygiene, and injuries consistent with physical abuse. Child Protective Services removed the surviving children from the home immediately and placed them in protective custody.
The medical examiner's autopsy of the 2-year-old found not only that asphyxiation had caused her death, but also additional injuries, suggesting the child had experienced abuse over time. The forensic findings led investigators and prosecutors to conclude that the circumstances of the child's death were not accidental. In July of 2025, a grand jury in Adams County returned indictments against Tien Hawkins on multiple serious charges: murder in the death of her 2-year-old daughter, involuntary manslaughter, child endangerment, and multiple counts of child abuse related to the treatment of her other children. Hawkins was arrested and held on substantial bond. As of the time of this recording, the case has not yet proceeded to trial. Tien Hawkins maintains a plea of not guilty to all charges. What is clear from the evidence gathered is that multiple children in the Hawkins home were suffering, and that the youngest among them did not survive. The case has prompted discussions in Adams counties about improving child welfare oversight in rural areas, where geographic isolation can make it harder to identify at-risk children before situations become fatal. Case 9. DEA Summers. Justice delayed, but not denied. Sometimes the wheels of justice turned slowly. In 2022, in Hawkins County, Ohio, 10-month-old Kamala died in hospital from catastrophic head trauma. Her mother, Daisha Summers, told medical staff and investigators that the injuries had resulted from an accident, a fall or similar mishap, while she was caring for her daughter. Medical personnel who examined Kamala were immediately skeptical. Pediatric specialists and child abuse experts who reviewed the case found that the pattern and severity of Kamala's injuries were not consistent with an accidental explanation. The injuries pointed toward abusive head trauma, in which an infant or young child is violently shaken or struck, causing the brain to move within the skull and producing bleeding, swelling, and irreversible damage. Despite the best efforts of the medical team, Kamala's injuries were fatal. The Hawkins County Sheriff's Office opened a homicide investigation. Building a prosecutable case in infant death investigations takes time. The evidence is primarily medical, requiring expert analysis and consultation. Prosecutors must be confident they can meet the beyond a reasonable doubt standard before filing charges. For 3 years, investigators continued to gather evidence and consult with medical experts. During that time, Daisha Summers wasn't charged. For Kamala's extended family, that 3-year wait was agonizing. They believed Summers was responsible for Kamala's death, and wanted to see the legal system respond. In December of 2025, it did. The Hawkins County Prosecutor's Office announced that Daisha Summers had been formally indicted on multiple charges, including murder, felonious assault, and child endangerment. Summers entered a plea of not guilty to all charges and is being held pending trial. The defense is expected to challenge the medical evidence and may bring in expert witnesses to offer alternative explanations for Kamala's injuries, a common defense strategy in abusive head trauma cases. Kamala was 10 months old when she died, a baby just beginning to discover the world around her. Her case is a reminder that investigators and prosecutors do not give up on infant victims, even when cases are complex and time-consuming. The legal process will now run its course, and a jury will ultimately determine Daisha Summers' guilt or innocence. Case 10. Timmeka Eggleton. A young life ended outside a Cleveland store. Our final case takes us to Cleveland, Ohio, in June of 2023. Shoppers outside a Cleveland store encountered a scene that no one should ever witness. A 3-year-old boy named Curtis Witcher was found in a stroller, unresponsive and visibly injured. His mother, 31-year-old Timmeka Eggleton, was with him. Emergency services were called immediately. Paramedics who examined Curtis found a child with severe injuries, consistent with blunt force trauma. He was transported to hospital, where he was pronounced dead. Cleveland Police Department detectives launched a homicide investigation, and their focus centered almost immediately on Eggleton. As the investigation unfolded, the evidence told a devastating story. According to witness accounts and physical evidence, Timmeka Eggleton had beaten her 3-year-old son. The attack had been severe and sustained. The medical examiner determined that Curtis died from blunt force trauma. He had been beaten to death. The autopsy revealed that Curtis had sustained injuries in various stages of healing, indicating that the fatal incident wasn't an isolated event. He had been subjected to violence on more than one occasion. Witnesses who had seen Eggleton and Curtis in the days and weeks before his death reported concerning interactions, rough handling, yelling, treatment that made observers uncomfortable. None of those observations had been reported to Child Protective Services before Curtis died. Timmeka Eggleton was arrested and charged with murder, felonious assault, and child endangerment. Faced with substantial physical evidence, witness accounts, and inconsistencies in her own statements to law enforcement, Eggleton made the decision to plead guilty. In the summer of 2023, she admitted responsibility for her son's death. The sentencing hearing was intensely emotional. Family members of Curtis addressed the court directly. They spoke about the little boy he had been, his smile, his laugh, the way he played, and about the future that had been stolen from him. The prosecution presented evidence of the brutality of the attack, the prior history of abuse, and the complete vulnerability of a 3-year-old child who had nowhere to turn and no one to protect him from his own mother. The judge's remarks at sentencing were direct. He described the case as among the most serious he had encountered and stated that Eggleton had violated the most fundamental responsibility a parent holds. Timmeka Eggleton was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole only after serving between 31 and 35 years. She was 31 years old at the time of sentencing. She will be in her 60s before she can even appear before a parole board. And parole eligibility is not the same as parole. Curtis Witcher was 3 years old. He had never started school. He had never learned to ride a bike. He was at the age when children are full of curiosity and energy, when the world is still entirely new. His memory is kept alive by his family, who established a memorial in his name, and who continue to speak about who he was, not just how he died. Tonight we have reviewed 10 cases from across the state of Ohio. 10 children whose lives were cut short by the people who were supposed to protect them most. From China, Arnold's use of a microwave oven as a murder weapon in 2005, to Timmeka Eggleton's beating death of her 3-year-old son in 2023, these cases span 2 decades of tragedy. The victims in these cases, Paris Talley, Jacob Diar, Joga's Child, Ashley Xiao, Jaylen Candelario, Brenda Powell, the 4-year-old daughter of Tamara Banks, The children of Tien Hawkins, Kamala, and Curtis Witcher deserve to be remembered, not only as victims of terrible crimes, but as individuals whose lives had value and whose potential was stolen before it could be realized. These cases also raise important questions that communities and policymakers must continue to address. How do we identify at-risk children before situations become fatal? How do we ensure that mandatory reporters follow through when they observe warning signs? How do we support isolated or struggling parents before a crisis occurs? How do we ensure that child protective services have the resources they need to respond effectively? The Ohio justice system worked in most of these cases. Investigators gathered evidence. Prosecutors built cases. Courts handed down sentences. But justice after the fact cannot restore what was lost. The real goal must be prevention, creating communities where children are seen, where concerns are reported, and where vulnerable families receive help before tragedy strikes. If you see something that concerns you regarding a child's safety, report it. Contact Child Protective Services or law enforcement. You do not need to be certain. You only need to be concerned. A single phone call can make a difference. Thank you for watching. This has been Cold Case Files. Please subscribe to stay informed on future investigations. Until next time, remember the victims and stay vigilant.